Just to push back a little bit, with those two new positions on the commission, would there be concerns that the fact that legislators can now weigh in or bring complaints against judges? Do you think that might have a similar effect?
I've thought about that. Legislators and citizens can already weigh in. Anyone who wants can send a complaint into the commission or the judicial ethics folks, and it'll get a fair look. What this really says is that if a legislator files a letter like that or a complaint, that the commission has to do an investigation. It doesn't say what that investigation is. I think it's probably going to work a lot like the way bar complaint investigations work. Someone will read it, and if it says you should take this judge off the bench because his dog barks too loudly, they'll get to the end of the letter, and that's the investigation, and it's done. If it's serious, though, they'll probably give it the weight it's worth and interview folks. I don't really see that as a fundamental change in the process. What is a fundamental change is we've got 30 people on the ballot. No one knows who they are. Take it down to the few who have real issues that are worth looking at.
Mr. Gordon, is there something to be said, again, for simplifying the process?
I almost never think there's something to be said for taking away people's rights to vote. I think Corey's view on the power of the legislators to start witch hunts is charitably naive. I think it will have a terrible effect on the Judicial Performance Review Committee because they're going to, my view, get bombarded by legislators who don't like this decision, don't like that decision, and they are going to require that commission to spend its time investigating. Those are volunteers, and how we're going to get volunteers to work in that atmosphere is beyond me. That's why a number of Supreme Court judges and retired judges are all opposed to this system.
Mr. Langhofer, would you like 30 seconds to respond?
They're certainly not all opposed. There's a divide among the judges about what this looks like, and that divide tragically follows partisan lines for the most part. And I think that's part of what worries me about this. The judiciary is becoming politicized. Keeping them on the ballots and making cases popularity contests, that is cancerous, and we should be careful about letting that spread.
Mr. Gordon, would you like 30 seconds to respond before we move on?
Yeah, it's not. So it's not on partisan grounds. We did a webinar on this, and we had 3 former Supreme Court justices in opposition. Justice McGregor, appointed by a Republican, Justice Palander, appointed by a Republican, and Justice Bales, appointed by a Democrat. And 2 of them had been Chief Justice, and one of them Justice Palander, who himself had been twice the target to being removed, who you would think would like this, probably spoke most eloquently at the corrosive effect this would have on the Judicial Performance Review Committee.
Now, you brought up the fact that if passed, that this would nullify the results of the retention elections on the 2024 ballot in counties with more than 250,000 people. So essentially all judges and justices would keep their posts. We're talking a lot about keeping politics out of the judiciary. So Mr. Langhofer, right now 2 Arizona Supreme Court justices who played a substantial role in our state's 2022 abortion ruling are up for retention. How do you address claims that Prop 137 is essentially meant to keep them on the bench?
It's factually false. I was there for the drafting of this. I was at every legislative hearing on it. That all happened before the abortion case was ever decided. It's a good talking point because the issue polls strongly. People have strong opinions about it. This is before all of that. This was in motion beforehand. Fundamentally, if you have a controversial case like abortion, or 15 years ago we were dealing with gay marriage, right? These are like watershed social issues that people have very strong feelings about. The last thing you want, if you're in a court with a judge, you don't want that judge looking around saying, which of these sides is more popular? Which one's going to get me kicked if I rule against them? That would be terrible. We need judges to not be worried about who's popular, and that's what this bill does.
Mr. Gordon, your response to that?
Well, one correction of what Corey said, the bill actually passed after the 1864 abortion decision came down. What the bill does, and I know I'm repeating myself, is some voters will just follow the recommendations of the Judicial Performance Review Committee, but some voters have very strong feelings about the appropriateness of that decision. This will take away their right to vote on a judge regarding that, which is a right they currently have.
Now, going along with that, actually, only 6 judges have been turned out of office since the system was implemented, and half of them were in 2022. So we've seen that increasing effort by certain organizations, by political action committees, to explicitly campaign for or against retention of certain justices. So, Mr. Gordon, with this movement toward more aggressive action, aggressive campaigning, times are changing. So does the system need to adjust as well?
Not in the way that's suggested here. The question is who's going to have the authority to determine whether someone should continue on the bench. And here, under this proposition, it is largely going to be left to the Judicial Performance Review Committee and taken away from the voters. Let me give you an example. The Judicial Performance Review Commission does a great job, but if a particular judge or justice has a particular philosophical point of view, like they're a Federalist Society judge, which I think is total nonsense, that will never get them sent for review under this. My right to weigh in on someone who's got what I can only describe as a weird view of what judges ought to do is immune from voter review.
Mr. Langhofer, what's your response to kind of the changing that we're seeing, the changing environment surrounding these judicial retention elections?
Yesterday, I saw a flyer that someone was publishing about which judges to vote for and which to vote against. And I think it said that they should vote against one judge because he'd been invited to speak to a group that the person writing this pamphlet didn't like, and he showed up and he spoke to the group, so you should vote against him. It wasn't saying that what he said was offensive or even wrong, just that he's associating with people I don't like, so you've got to vote against him. This is no way to run a courtroom. Like, judges are there to listen to all sides, collect information, share their neutral opinion. They can attend a meeting with someone you don't like and still be qualified to be a judge. What's happening with the politicization of the judiciary is a very bad path for the state.
So that leads to one of my other questions. Can judges be truly independent, truly neutral in their decision making?
If you're on the ballot and you have a controversial case in front of you and you know whoever loses is running a big dollar campaign against you, not because you're unethical or because you took a bribe or you're mistreating people in your courtroom, but just they don't like what you thought of the law, it's going to be tough. I mean, I practice mostly political cases, so controversial cases inherently. And I would be really nervous if this current trend continues. I'd be nervous about attending court with a judge that I think believes the other side will run a no campaign against him if he votes for us, even if we're right on the law. And that's not fair to my clients, it's not fair to me. Look, we've gotten this far as a state and as a country because the judges have generally been immune from this sort of pressure. The current political environment is deteriorating. It's getting worse and worse. And if we let that spread to judges, it's not going to get better.
Mr. Gordon, can judges be truly independent?
In 90%, look, I practiced law here for 50 years. As Corey knows, an election lawyer on the other side, almost that entire time. 90% of the cases, it really doesn't matter what their political philosophy is. They just make a decision. It's in those other 10% of the cases, a lot of them are election law cases, some of them are other controversial issues like the 1864 abortion ruling. And they are, I think, deciding those not based on the facts or the law, but they're deciding those on their own philosophy. I can tell you with great certainty in most of those cases exactly which judge is going to vote which way because they bring their philosophy to the bench. That's not surprising because those cases get to the court, particularly the Supreme Court, because it's not all that clear. I mean, this notion that judges call balls and strikes is just nonsense. They don't call balls and strikes. Maybe the Superior Court, the lower courts do, but by the time it gets to the Supreme Court, there's a serious dispute involved. And in those sorts of cases, they definitely bring a judicial philosophy and follow it. And that's why the governors appoint who the governors appoint. To give that review process or that retention process more political input, which is what 137 does, and take it away from the voters. I mean, the argument Corey's making is the voters are just too stupid to figure out what the hell's going on. I find that wrong.
Mr. Langhofer, 30 seconds to respond to that.
If you look at the rulings from this Arizona Supreme Court over the last 4 years, and whether they're siding with the left or the right, you wouldn't know what their own political leanings are. They ruled against Donald Trump. They ruled against Abe Hamada. They ruled against Kerry Lake, shifted fees against Kerry Lake. That is hardly the work of a right-wing ideological court, which is the allegation from the other side. They say, we've got to get rid of them because they're ideologues. Why are they ruling against Republicans all the time? They're doing a good job to call balls and strikes. Everyone's going to disagree. I've never lost a case and thought it was fair. But that's not true. I probably have a couple times. I'm sure Mr. Gordon felt the same way. Whoever loses a controversial case is going to have a gripe about it. The real question is, are they trying their level best? You're going to disagree with them sometimes, but if they're doing that, that's all you can ask.
Okay, I want to get to one final question for each of you as our time is going quickly. Mr. Gordon, you do not agree with Prop 137. Are there other methods that you agree with to improve our current judiciary system?
Justice Bales had an opinion piece where he made some suggestions regarding changes to the Judicial Nominating Commission that I think are well worth considering. There is another suggestion I heard from some judges that if a judge is not retained, that the governor can only appoint a replacement of that judge's own party. That kind of makes some sense to me. There may be some things to make it better. This is not it.
But not this. All right, Mr. Langhofer, quickly, what is at stake if this does not pass? We have about 20, 30 seconds here.
When you have a real problem in your life, usually if you end up in court, it's because you've got a divorce or a criminal case. That judge has tremendous power over you. You need to trust that that judge is going to treat you fairly, regardless of how popular you or your opponent are. This protects that independence.
All right, thank you. It is already time for closing statements, so each of you has 1 minute, and to keep us on time, we will politely jump in if we have to. So, Corey Langhofer, you have the first closing statement.
Thanks, Danielle. Fundamentally, Mr. Gordon's worried about this measure taking away your right to vote, and that's not fair. That's not what's happening. Citizens control the judicial performance review process, and as Mr. Gordon said, that's still the driving force behind who gets on the ballot and who doesn't. When you have 30 judges, you and your neighbors don't have time to research them properly, and so in 99.7% of all of those elections, the judges have just been approved, not because they were fully researched and everyone approved of them, but because it tends to be somewhat easier to say, like, well, without a good reason, I won't vote against them. If you focus your time and attention on just the judges that may not be doing a good job, you're going to make better decisions, or you're going to have a better court system.
All right, Mr. Gordon, you have 1 minute for your closing statement.
When Danielle read the summary of the proposition at the top of the show, it says it takes away the right to vote, it nullifies your vote this year, it gives these people lifetime appointments overwhelmingly, and it interjects the politicians at the legislature much more deeply in the process. Everything about that's wrong. Justice O'Connor did the state a huge favor coming up with this, and we should not just honor her memory, but recognize that this is a model. Vote no.
All right, well, this wraps today's debate over Proposition 137. And just as a reminder, Arizona's general election is on Tuesday, November 5th, and early voting starts Wednesday, October 9th. You can head to azmedia.org to see a list of upcoming debates and where you can find them on TV, radio, and digital platforms provided by our local media partners. For the full debate schedule and to submit questions for future debates, head to azcleanelections.gov. On behalf of our partners at Clean Elections, the Arizona Media Association, Reister, and Bitfire Studios, thanks for joining us.